AI is completely changing procurement and AP process in companies, and many companies are slow to adapt. In my experience, I've worked with hundreds of companies in automating their purchasing and AP process. So I've seen firsthand the night and day difference between companies that use AI and the one that don't. So in this video, I'm going to give you a complete understanding of how AI is changing procurement and AP and how you can survive this transition in using AI into your day-to-day. So let's get into it. The main fundamental difference in the past, it was always about how we can speed up an existing process. And in this time, AI is kind of completely automating the process. It's replacing the human day-to-day. You see, in the last 20 years, finance teams or AP teams has been mostly focused on the work that happens post the purchase, which means receiving the invoice, figuring out who ordered this product or service, coding it to the right GL, and following up with people to get it approved, and then of course paying the vendors. So imagine if this whole process is automated so that end-to-end process from requisition, purchase orders, invoice matching, and invoice approval is done by the system itself, and it only kind of raises its hands on hey, there's an exception you need to look at. So in our experience, or what we feel what's going to happen is in the next 2 to 3 years, you will start seeing most of these processes running on its own, and human is not involved in terms of clicking the buttons, but human involvement is required for reviewing the exceptions. Now, most CFOs and controllers are kind of slow to react to that because their teams are still busy. There are many reasons for that. First of all, a lot of finance leaders have seen these waves in the past, right? This is not the first time they're seeing a major technological shift. So a lot of time people are just waiting on the sides for things to stabilize and then figure out what would be the real advantage of something like this. For example, they have seen OCR in the past, right? Great promise that your team does not need to enter the invoice in the system, but OCR in itself did not fully solve the problem. It kind of got you there 90%, but you still need to manually review the invoice or the output to make sure it is correct or any correction needs to be made. I think that's number one, is they have seen this movie play before and they are skeptical for right reasons. So there has to be enough proof in the market before they decide to kind of move forward in implementing in their day-to-day processes. The second is the work is still going on, right? Your AP team is busy. They're still processing invoices. They're still chasing approvals, and month-end close process is happening. Maybe you're closing it in 15 days and you would like to do it in 10 days, but it's not end of the world. And most important is there are existing headcount that is actually doing the work. So they haven't transitioned to something else, right? They're still doing the work. So there's no need for them to automate the work, because most companies look for automation when they're scaling and the current headcount cannot keep up with the scale. Now, the real difference between what we've seen before versus now and what AI is doing, it's completely replacing the process. Now, what it does, it learns from the historical data. So if you have historical data where you can kind of feed AI and say, this is how we do classification of invoices, this is our spending pattern, these are our GL codes, it can now predict as well as assign those documents, right? So imagine invoice coming in, it is running it through like a scan to figure out what's in the document. Once the invoice is in, it can match it to like a receipt or a purchase order to a 2-way, 3-way match, and then only raise exceptions for a human to review when your defined rules are kind of not matched, right? Or you received a utility bill, it can look at the past data and say, all right, you normally code utility bills this way, so I'm going to just automatically assign the GL codes. So the difference here is, rather than it suggesting and saying this is what you should do, it is basically doing the work for you and not waiting for a human to click and move to the next step. So pretty much the way to think about this is, if you're a finance leader, this is the first time AP is not the bottleneck to process invoices and pay the vendors, right? So if everything done right and you've automated the process, you have now created a machine that can process any sort of volume without adding additional headcount or being dependent on individuals to chase people for approvals and so on. Now, if you are a team lead or a controller of a company, a fundamental thing to think about is how AI is going to change your team structure. So if you have current staff members who are doing the work in terms of entering the invoices in the system, chasing people for approval, doing the invoice matching and so on, if you automate all that process, what your team would look like, which means you need to strategically think about how you're going to transition your team from what they're doing today to more value-add activities, and honestly kind of charting a roadmap or a career path for them to transition from one to another. And this is super critical. We'll talk about why this is important in a minute. But real quick, if you want to see how an autonomous AI can help automate purchasing and AP process, click on the link below and talk to one of our product specialists. We'll kind of walk you through how AI is used in a system like ProcureDesk to automate invoice coding, invoice approvals, invoice matching, and reducing your month-end close cycle time from, let's say, 15 to 16 days to all the way to 3 to 4 days. So if you're a finance leader sitting on the fence of what to do with AI, this is how I would start planning to survive the AI journey. So number one is making sure your historical data is correct. So what I mean by that, if you don't have a real purchasing process, like your approvals happens over emails or Slack messages and so on, you don't have a real knowledge base to build AI on top of it. There's not enough data for it to kind of know. Or your GL codes are all over the place. Sometimes you use one GL code, sometimes you use the other GL code, and they have never been, I would say, consolidated. And that's an opportunity for you to do that. Or suppliers or supplier variations are used. Amazon Inc., Amazon Capital. Those are some of the fundamental things that you need to have while you're waiting for how we're going to use AI. I think it's prudent to start now to automate the process. So if your purchasing process is living in spreadsheets, this is the time to start automating it. So you have a consistent input of data that now you can eventually use to build AI automation around that, right? So that's kind of number one. Now, if you don't do that, AI has nothing to learn from. So really it can't help automate, or the outcome, even if it tried to do it, the outcome is going to be very limited and you'll probably say AI doesn't work. The second thing is to start thinking about how to move your team to more strategic work. Now, if you see your team is valuable, right? So all the resources that you have in the team, they're doing the work of moving the machine that allows you to close the books on time, whether it is coding the invoices, whether it is chasing people for approvals and so on. But if you implement AI, that work is going away. So how do you transition your team to make sure you can take the team along with you on this journey versus kind of cutting headcount, to be honest? So a way to think about this is, what are the strategic activities that the team is not able to do today? So another way, think of if you had a magic wand and it can take away all your AP problems, what your team would be doing on a day-to-day basis. Would they have more time now to analyze the results and present like a more cohesive story on what's going on with expenses or with AR? Or maybe they should work on optimizing the payment terms with the vendors. So if you have a lot of vendors where we are paying net 30, there is a float gain that you can have by extending from net 30 to net 45 or even net 60. So, and that is real cash flow, right? So it's a one-time advantage that you can gain. If you're leading a team, your role shifts from, I want to, focus more on activities to more focus on how do we transition from more tactical activities to more strategic activities. And not only plan, but also crystallize the direction for your team and educate your team on how they're going to transition through this. And this is super critical, right? If your team is always living in this continuous fear of losing their job, they're not going to A, adopt, or B, help you adopt the technology. Now, let's say if you're in another bucket where you're ready to implement AI. So let's talk about key mistakes to avoid. We're going to talk about 3 or 4 mistakes that one should look to avoid, or the pitfalls to avoid. So number one is trying to automate process using AI on a undefined process or a process that is not structured. If you don't have approval matrix in place, delegation of authority, or a purchasing policy, that's the first basic fundamental thing. 2 is you don't have historical data to feed AI. So if everything is done through emails, spreadsheets, and so on, you probably don't have enough data to feed the system. So I would say fundamentally, you set the base first and then put AI on top. So if your data is not clean or the data is missing, the first thing to do would be have fundamental systems in place, like purchasing system, before you put AI on top of it. So that's number one. Don't automate a process that's not ready for automation yet. The second mistake is finance team is resisting the AI change because really they see this as a threat to their job. And if they see this as a threat to their job, they're not going to adopt it, which means you're probably going to spend a lot of money and get zero value. And change management overall, whether it's AI or anything else, you have to kind of think about the different change management process, right? So I heard it somewhere is like people don't like to change, but they change for a reason. And that reason you have to provide them, right? So which means you have to clearly articulate in terms of what changes we are doing and how their job is changing before you start implementing it. Otherwise, they will keep resisting it and you won't get anywhere. The third mistake to avoid is making sure you're picking the right platform. I've seen many cases where CFOs purchase augmented AI solutions versus autonomous. A augmented solution is, it is going to help you do the job faster, but a human needs to be involved. An autonomous solution is it learns from the past data and does the job for you. So when you're selecting a platform, whether it is for procurement, whether it is for purchasing, the real question to ask is how much of the job can be done autonomously versus augmented, like the team has to review. And the other thing to kind of also look at is if you are not 100% on the bandwagon of everything should be automated, you can take the transition path in a way that for the first few months, system is asking for review continuously. And once you get confidence on the system that it is working, you can make it fully autonomous. So make sure you're picking the right platform. Otherwise, you'll implement AI thinking it's AI, but your people are still involved in the day-to-day process and they cannot get out of the tactical activities, which means you cannot move them to more strategic work. So if you want to actually use autonomous AI in your procurement in AP process and make sure you avoid all the mistakes we talked about, click on the link below and schedule some time to talk to one of our product specialists. We'll walk you through the exact steps and process that you need to implement to use AI in your procurement and AP process. In our experience, we have seen companies that have implemented it, not only the faster invoice processing time, but it reduces their close cycle time from 10 to 15 days all the way up to 3 to 4 days. And you can do this all in 2 weeks. Again, click on the link below to schedule some time with one of our product specialists. And if you want to know how you can close books faster, check this video.